Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we are diving into a really fascinating piece of independent research by Gautam Pal. We're looking at a theoretical framework called dual motion equilibrium, and it honestly aims to do nothing short of completely redefining our foundational understanding of matter itself. We're talking about shifting our entire perspective from looking at matter as just static building blocks to seeing it as a dynamic, breathing system of forces. And as you'll see, we're going to explore how this blueprint proposes actual, mathematically backed elemental transmutation. You know, it's the classic age-old mystery of alchemy, right? For centuries, alchemists dreamt of turning base metals into precious gold. But what's so wild about this new theoretical framework is that it approaches this ancient concept not with magic or mysticism or some elusive philosopher's stone, but with quantum vacuum energy. According to the author, physical elements just aren't immutable. By completely redefining how atoms are held together at the most fundamental subatomic level, the paper suggests that elements can actually be shifted. So the key takeaway here is that we aren't talking about chemical reactions, we're talking about altering the very mathematical and energetic foundation of an element itself.
Right out of the gate in the abstract, the author makes this incredibly bold claim. He states that this framework, quote, opens advanced pathways for controlled elemental transmutation, specifically demonstrated here via the mathematical reconfiguration of copper into gold. He isn't just speaking in broad generalities about theoretical physics here. He is literally claiming a specific mathematical blueprint for converting one distinct element into another using resonance fields. Okay, so how exactly does he get there? Well, to understand that, we have to contrast this idea with traditional classical mechanics. Usually physics looks at forces as isolated vectors or static balance equations. Like in classical mechanics, centripetal effects are often just treated as rotational pseudo-forces. But Gautam Pal's proposed dual motion framework introduces a wild new axiom. He argues that any physical object requires the active presence of internal dual forces functioning completely in unison. Basically, matter is not a static object, it's an active equilibrium. It's a localized energy flow that transitions from internal vibration to free emission. It is a fully dynamic model where matter is, essentially, an active, breathing equilibrium of continuous forces. Now, to actually make this dynamic model work, he introduces something he calls the space gap hypothesis. Think about it. We usually picture an atom as a nucleus, some orbiting electrons, and then just a whole lot of empty space in between. But what if those spaces aren't empty voids at all? The author posits that they are completely saturated with active electromagnetic vacuum energy. He argues that physical matter literally requires this intrinsic spatial separation, this gap, to have the dynamic degrees of freedom it needs for movement. In this framework, the vacuum isn't just a whole lot of nothing. It is a dense, highly active field of energy that physical matter relies on just to exist. So if that subatomic space is actually jam-packed with active vacuum energy, what gives a specific element its actual shape and stability? The paper defines this as the structural backbone. It's this continuous flow of localized energy along a dynamic vector axis. By integrating the net force field of that active vacuum energy over a specific duration of time, it creates the absolute physical stability and configuration of the element. You can almost think of it as an invisible energetic spine. It's this active, continuous energy flow that creates the internal framework of every single piece of matter we interact with. Right, so how does this structural backbone actually stay intact? It happens through dual motion vectors. You basically have two continuous, simultaneous forces at play here. Centripetal motion is your inward pulling vector. It's responsible for structural cohesion, binding the center together. Then you have centrifugal motion, which is the outward pushing vector. That one's responsible for spatial distribution and making sure the atom actually takes up physical volume. Imagine a perfectly inflated balloon. The rubber is constantly pulling inward, trying to collapse on itself, while the air pressure inside is constantly pushing outward. It's that exact active tension, that simultaneous push and pull, that sustains the balloon's shape. And according to the paper, that is exactly how elemental structures are sustained. And this leads to a really profound shift in how we view the building blocks of the universe. If matter is really just this active equilibrium of push and pull within a totally saturated vacuum, then standard subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, they aren't independent, permanent physical blocks. They are simply localized manifestations of condensed energy states. Their accumulation and configurations are mathematically dictated by the specific slowing down or the degradation of fundamental wave frequencies within that vacuum. Basically, matter is just what happens when energy frequencies slow down and condense into a localized matrix. Which brings us to the absolute climax of the paper, transmutation. If elements aren't just static Lego blocks, but are simply specific baseline structural profiles of condensed energy, we can actually compare them mathematically. Take copper, for instance, atomic number 29. Its baseline profile is mathematically designated by the paper as psi Cu. Then we have gold, atomic number 79, designated as psi Au. Under this new paradigm, the difference between these two elements is really just a difference in their energetic condensation coefficients and baseline frequency decay pathways. They are just two differently stabilized structural backbones. And if they are fundamentally just frequencies and energy states, the paper argues, one can be shifted into the other. Let's walk through the logic of his mathematical proof here without getting totally bogged down in the equations themselves. First, you mathematically quantize the stable state of the initial element over a massive duration. You're treating its life cycle as approaching infinity. Next, you define the precise structural invariance for both copper and gold based entirely on their unique vacuum frequencies. And finally, the catalyst. You apply an external electromagnetic resonance field to systematically alter those internal frequency parameters. You're essentially modulating the energetic field to perfectly match a new structural invariant, and doing it all without causing chaotic radioactive decay. So, according to the author's mathematical proof, tuning the ratio of the external field's amplitude to its resonance frequency shifts the dynamic frequency matrix of the vacuum proportionally. But what does that actually mean in plain English? It means that by applying the exact right external resonance, you naturally force that vacuum energy to condense the precise distribution of protons, neutrons, and electrons required for gold. You are taking the structural backbone of copper, and by introducing a highly specific frequency modulation, you are explicitly reshaping that invisible energetic spine directly into the structural backbone of gold. Let's think about this number for a second. 50. That is the exact difference in the atomic number between copper, which is 29, and gold, which is 79. In traditional chemistry, trying to jump an atomic number by 50 seems like a completely insurmountable physical wall. You'd need a massive particle accelerator, insane amounts of energy, and frankly, it usually just results in highly unstable radioactive isotopes. But under this dual motion paradigm, that difference of 50 simply represents a specific, calculable mathematical accumulation of condensed vacuum energy. It's really just a shift in the frequency matrix. By finding the exact external resonance field amplitude, that massive gap of 50 is bridged mathematically and smoothly. So to kind of wrap up the paper's conclusion, this dual motion equilibrium framework provides a theoretical foundation for non-destructive, resonance-driven elemental transmutation. By establishing that the structural backbone of matter is really an active balance forged within an electromagnetically active vacuum, this independent study attempts to totally remove the rigid, static constraints of traditional chemistry. It replaces them with a highly dynamic model of energy-matter conversion. Now, whether or not this mathematical blueprint can actually be realized in a physical laboratory, well, that remains to be seen. But the theoretical doors it opens for advanced material science are absolutely fascinating. And I really want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If we actually accept the premise of this theoretical paper, if matter is not made of permanent, immutable building blocks, but is simply a localized manifestation of energy frequencies sustained by this constant push and pull equilibrium, what else can we reshape? If a mathematical resonance field can theoretically turn copper into gold non-destructively, the applications for things like clean energy, material synthesis, and waste remediation would be virtually limitless. It completely changes how we look at the physical world around us. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the universe.